The morning fog clung to the steel rails of the USS Nimitz like a shroud, muffling the sound of boots against wet deck plates. Somewhere in the gray mist, a woman walked alone across the flight deck, her silhouette barely visible against the massive bulk of F/A-18 Super Hornets lined up like sleeping giants. She moved with purpose but without haste, her plain khaki uniform offering no clue to her identity. No ribbons caught the pale light. No rank insignia gleamed on her collar. Just empty spaces where decorations should have been. The crew members who passed her in the corridors barely looked up. Another transfer, they assumed. Another paper pusher from some shore command. But if they had looked closer, if they had noticed the way she held herself, the precise measurement of each step, the calm alertness in her eyes, as she catalogued every detail around her, they might have wondered who she really was. By 0800 hours, she had disappeared into the maze of the carrier's interior, leaving only questions that no one thought to ask. Questions that would soon demand answers, in ways none of them could imagine. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The wardroom buzzed with the controlled energy of morning briefings. Officers clustered around tables, steam rising from coffee cups as they reviewed flight schedules and weather reports. The overhead lights cast everything in harsh fluorescent white, making the polished surfaces gleam like mirrors. At the head table, Admiral Robert Hawthorne held court, his voice carrying across the room with the easy authority of a man who had never doubted his own importance. Hawthorne was Navy royalty, third-generation admiral, veteran of 3 carrier deployments, and the kind of leader who believed that command presence meant being the loudest voice in any room. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon perfectly aligned, his gold braid catching the light as he gestured broadly while telling a story about a junior officer who had made the mistake of questioning his tactical decisions. So this lieutenant, fresh from the academy, mind you, has the nerve to suggest we adjust our approach vector. Hawthorne chuckled, and several officers around the table joined in dutifully. I told him, son, when you've got 30 years of experience and your own battle group, then we'll talk about vectors. The laughter rippled through the nearby tables. It was the kind of performance Hawthorne specialized in, equal parts leadership and theater, designed to remind everyone exactly where they stood in the hierarchy. He thrived on these moments, these small demonstrations of dominance disguised as camaraderie. Near the back of the wardroom, Commander Lisa Park sat quietly at a smaller table, her expression neutral as she reviewed a thick folder of operational reports. She had arrived during the night watch, transferred from what the duty log listed simply as Pacific Fleet Special Operations. No additional details, no explanation of her role or mission, just another temporary assignment in the endless shuffle of Navy personnel. Park was unremarkable in the way that dangerous people often were. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in regulation style, a face that revealed nothing. Her uniform bore the standard commander's oak leaves, but the chest above them was conspicuously bare, no ribbons, no warfare pins, no indication of specialty or achievement. To the casual observer, she looked like someone who had spent her career behind a desk, pushing papers and managing logistics. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the carrier's assistant operations officer, noticed her first. He was the kind of officer who prided himself on knowing everyone aboard, tracking the complex web of relationships and hierarchies that made a carrier function. A new face always caught his attention, especially one that didn't fit the usual patterns. "You're the new transfer," he said, settling into the chair across from her with his coffee mug. "Lisa Park, right? Operations told me you'd be joining us for the exercise." She looked up from her reports, her expression polite but distant. "That's correct." Morrison waited for more where she was coming from, what her background was, the usual small talk that helped officers establish their place in the pecking order. When nothing came, he tried a different approach. "What's your specialty? Aviation? Surface warfare?" He glanced meaningfully at her bare chest. "Still waiting for your ribbons to catch up with you?" Park's gaze was steady, unreadable, something like that. Across the room, Admiral Hawthorne's voice rose again, this time in the middle of another war story about a particularly challenging landing approach he had executed years earlier. The tale grew in drama with each telling, and the assembled officers responded with the appropriate mixture of admiration and amusement. Morrison tried once more. "Well, you picked an interesting time to come aboard. We're heading into the largest joint exercise in the Pacific this year. Hawthorne's been planning it for months, coordinating with the Air Force, Marines, even some international partners. Should be quite a show." "I'm sure it will be," Park replied, turning a page in her folder. Her tone was neutral, professional, but there was something underneath it that Morrison couldn't quite identify. Not disrespect, exactly, but a kind of quiet confidence that seemed oddly out of place for someone with no visible credentials. The briefing was scheduled to begin at 0830, and as the time approached, officers began filing toward the front of the wardroom. Hawthorne took his position at the podium, his aide setting up the projection screen behind him. Maps of the Pacific appeared, overlaid with fleet positions and exercise boundaries marked in precise geometric shapes. Park remained in her seat near the back, her folder closed now, hands folded calmly in her lap. She watched the room with the same quiet attention she had given to everything else, cataloging faces, noting the subtle dynamics of rank and influence, observing the careful choreography of military hierarchy in motion. Morrison found himself glancing back at her repeatedly. There was something about the way she held herself, a stillness that seemed to absorb the energy around her rather than reflecting it back. Most officers, especially new arrivals, carried a certain tension, the need to prove themselves, to establish their credentials, to find their place in the existing order. Park showed none of that anxiety. She simply waited, patient and alert, like someone who had nothing to prove because she had already proven everything that mattered. When Hawthorne called the briefing to order, his voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade. "Gentlemen and ladies, let's talk about making history. Operation Pacific Thunder begins in 72 hours, and I intend for this battle group to set the standard for joint operations worldwide." The room straightened automatically, the casual chatter fading to respectful silence. On the screen behind him, the exercise area spread across hundreds of miles of ocean, marked with symbols representing ships, aircraft, and simulated threat zones. It was an impressive display of coordination and firepower, the kind of demonstration that would be studied in war colleges for years to come. But as Park studied the tactical display, her expression remained unchanged. If anything, she seemed to be seeing something different from everyone else, not the grand spectacle of military precision, but the small details that others might have missed, the timing sequences that didn't quite align, the communication protocols that left gaps in coverage, the assumptions that had been made about enemy capabilities and intentions. She had seen exercises like this before, from a very different perspective, and she knew, with the quiet certainty that came from hard experience, that Admiral Hawthorne's perfect plan was about to be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. Admiral Hawthorne stepped away from the podium with the satisfied air of a man who had just delivered a masterpiece. The tactical overview of Operation Pacific Thunder had unfolded like clockwork: fleet positions, air corridors, coordinated strikes against simulated enemy forces, every element precisely planned, every contingency addressed. Or, so he believed. "Questions?" he asked, scanning the assembled officers with the confidence of someone who didn't expect any. The wardroom remained quiet. Officers studied their notes, or stared at the tactical display, absorbing the complexity of the operation they were about to execute. It was an impressive plan, built on years of doctrine and refined through countless simulations. But impressive plans, as some in that room had learned through bitter experience, didn't always survive contact with reality. Commander Park remained in her seat near the back, her expression thoughtful as she continued to study the display. Her fingers drummed silently against her folder, a barely perceptible rhythm that might have been nervousness but felt more like calculation. She was seeing patterns in the data that others had missed, gaps in coverage that the planning staff had dismissed as acceptable risks. Lieutenant Commander Morrison noticed her focus and felt a strange urge to defend the briefing. "Pretty comprehensive operation," he said quietly. "Hawthorne's team has been working on this for months." Park nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the screen. "It's certainly thorough." Something in her tone made Morrison look closer. "You see something wrong with it?" Before she could answer, Admiral Hawthorne's voice cut across the room. "I said questions, people. Don't make me stand here all day waiting for someone to find their voice." The challenge hung in the air, equal parts invitation and dare. Most of the officers in the room were too junior to risk questioning an admiral's planning, especially one with Hawthorne's reputation for sharp responses to criticism. But a few senior commanders might have had thoughts they were keeping to themselves. Park closed her folder with a soft snap and stood slowly. The movement was quiet, unhurried, but something about it drew attention. Conversations died away as officers turned to see who was responding to Hawthorne's challenge. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room despite its calm tone. "I do have a question." Hawthorne's eyebrows rose slightly. He had expected questions from his senior staff, perhaps a clarification from one of the squadron commanders. But this woman, this commander, with the empty chest and unremarkable background, was not someone he had anticipated hearing from. "By all means, Commander." He paused, clearly having forgotten her name. "Park. Commander Park, please, share your question with the group." Park moved slightly away from her table, not quite approaching the front of the room but positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly. Her posture was relaxed, professional, but there was something in the way she carried herself that suggested reserves of strength held carefully in check. "The communications architecture for the exercise," she began, her tone respectful but direct. "The primary coordination is running through the Kestrel network, correct?" Hawthorne nodded, his expression shifting from polite attention to mild annoyance. "That's correct. The Kestrel system has been the backbone of fleet communications for 2 years now. Highly secure, proven reliable. And the backup protocols? Standard redundancy. If primary communications fail, we fall back to traditional radio frequencies with appropriate encryption." Hawthorne's voice carried a slight edge now. This was feeling less like a question and more like a challenge to his planning. Park nodded thoughtfully. "The problem with Kestrel is the relay dependency. If someone compromises the satellite uplink, say, through frequency manipulation or targeted jamming, the entire network cascades into failure. Your backup frequencies won't engage fast enough to maintain coordinated operations across a battle group this size." The room went dead silent. Officers exchanged glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a legitimate tactical discussion or watching a junior officer commit career suicide by questioning an admiral's expertise in front of his entire staff. Hawthorne's face flushed slightly. "Commander, the Kestrel system has been thoroughly tested. I hardly think a newcomer to this command is qualified to question communications protocols that have been in development for years." "You're absolutely right," Park replied, her tone unchanged. "I wouldn't be qualified to question them, but I might be qualified to fix them when they fail." The words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Not quite insubordination, not quite respect, but something in between that made everyone in the room suddenly uncertain about what they were hearing. Hawthorne stepped closer to the edge of the raised platform, his authority clearly challenged. "And exactly what qualifications do you think you have to fix fleet communications, Commander?" Park met his gaze steadily. "Experience." "What kind of experience?" His voice was sharper now, the jovial Admiral replaced by someone whose competence had been publicly questioned. "Your record shows nothing but administrative assignments." "My record shows what it's supposed to show." The statement was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it took a moment for the implications to sink in. But when they did, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Officers who had been leaning back in their chairs sat up straighter. Morrison found himself holding his breath. Hawthorne laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Oh, I see. We have a mystery woman aboard. Let me guess, classified assignments? Black operations? The kind of service record that's too secret for the rest of us to understand?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. The kind of laughter that comes when people are uncomfortable but don't know how else to react. Park didn't join in. She simply stood there, calm and unmoving, like a reef that lets the waves break against it without being diminished. "Admiral," she said quietly, "permission to speak freely?" Hawthorne gestured grandly. "By all means, Commander. Enlighten us with your expertise. The Kestrel vulnerability isn't theoretical. It was exploited 18 months ago during Exercise Coral Shield. The entire Pacific Fleet lost communications for 4 hours because someone assumed the system was proven reliable. Ships nearly collided, trying to maintain formation without coordination. Aircraft returned to the wrong carriers. The after-action report was classified, but the lessons learned should have been incorporated into current planning." The room was absolutely still now. What had started as a simple Q&A session had become something else entirely, a confrontation between established authority and uncomfortable truth. Hawthorne's face had gone from flushed to pale, and Morrison could see the Admiral's jaw working as he processed what Park had just said. "That exercise was classified," Hawthorne said slowly. "How could you possibly know the details of the communications failure?" Park's answer was so quiet that officers in the front row had to strain to hear it. "Because I wrote the report." The silence that followed was so complete that the only sound was the distant hum of the carrier's machinery and the muffled noise of aircraft operations from the deck above. Every eye in the room was fixed on the unremarkable woman standing near the back of the wardroom, the commander, with no ribbons and no apparent credentials, who had just claimed authorship of one of the most sensitive technical documents in recent naval history. Hawthorne stared at her for a long moment, his mind clearly working through the implications. The Coral Shield after-action report had been written by someone with access to the highest levels of fleet operations, someone with intimate knowledge of communications systems and tactical coordination. It had been classified not just for its sensitive content, but because its author had requested anonymity for operational security reasons. "That report," he said slowly, "was written by someone at the Pentagon, someone with clearance levels well above commander." Park said nothing. She simply stood there, waiting, her expression giving away nothing of what she was thinking or feeling. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Finally, Morrison couldn't stand it anymore. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "what's your actual assignment here?" Park turned to look at him, and for just a moment, he caught something in her eyes that made him understand why she had been so calm throughout Hawthorne's challenges. It wasn't confidence or arrogance. It was the quiet patience of someone who was used to being underestimated and had long since stopped caring about other people's assumptions. "I'm here," she said simply, "to observe." The wardroom cleared slowly after the briefing ended, officers filing out in small groups, their conversations muted and uncertain. The comfortable hierarchy that had governed their morning had been disrupted by something they couldn't quite understand or categorize. Commander Park remained at her table, reorganizing her folder with the same methodical care she had shown throughout the meeting. Admiral Hawthorne lingered near the podium, ostensibly reviewing his notes, but clearly wrestling with what had just occurred. The woman had rattled him in a way that few people could manage, and he didn't like the feeling. He was accustomed to being the most knowledgeable person in any room, the final authority on naval operations. Park's casual mention of classified reports and system vulnerabilities had undermined that certainty in front of his entire staff. Lieutenant Commander Morrison approached Park's table with 2 fresh cups of coffee, setting one down in front of her with careful politeness. "Thought you might need this," he said, settling into the chair across from her. That was an interesting discussion. Park looked up from her papers, acknowledging the coffee with a small nod. "Thank you. I hope I didn't make things difficult for anyone." "You definitely made things interesting." Morrison studied her face, trying to read something in her expression that might explain what he had just witnessed. That report you mentioned, Coral Shield. I've heard rumors about a communications breakdown during that exercise. Scuttlebutt was that it nearly caused some serious problems. Rumors tend to exaggerate, Park replied, taking a careful sip of her coffee. But the technical vulnerabilities were real enough. And you really wrote the after-action report? Park set down her cup and looked at him directly. Mr. Morrison, what do you know about operational security? The question caught him off guard. The basics, I suppose. Need to know information, classified material handling, that sort of thing. Then you understand that there are some things I can discuss and others I cannot. Her tone was gentle but firm, leaving no room for further questions along those lines. Morrison nodded, accepting the deflection. But his curiosity was far from satisfied. Can I ask what you meant when you said you're here to observe? Observe what? Before Park could answer, the ship's communication system crackled to life with an announcement from the bridge. All department heads to the flag bridge. Exercise, Pacific Thunder timeline, has been moved up. Repeat, all department heads to the flag bridge immediately. The urgency in the announcement was unmistakable. Morrison's expression shifted instantly to concern. That's not normal. We're not supposed to begin the exercise for another 2 days. Park was already standing, her folder secured under her arm. Mr. Morrison, how quickly can you access the current Kestrel network status from the communications center? The question was so specific, so technical, that Morrison found himself answering before he had time to wonder why she was asking. 2 minutes, maybe 3 if the systems are busy. Then I suggest we head there now. Something in her tone, not panic, but a kind of focused intensity, made Morrison move without further questions. They left the wardroom together, but Park's pace was just quick enough to suggest she knew something he didn't. The communications center of the USS Nimitz was a compact space filled with banks of monitors, keyboards, and transmission equipment. The constant chatter of radio traffic created a background hum, punctuated by the beeping of electronic systems. When Morrison and Park arrived, they found the watch officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, frowning at one of the primary displays. "What's the status on Kestrel?" Morrison asked without preamble. Chen looked up, her expression troubled. "We're getting intermittent connectivity issues. Signal strength is fluctuating, and there are packet delays that shouldn't be happening. I was about to report it to the communications officer." Morrison turned to Park, expecting to see concern on her face. Instead, he found something that looked almost like resignation, the expression of someone whose predictions were being confirmed despite their hopes to the contrary. "Show me the signal diagnostics," Park said quietly, moving to stand behind Chen's workstation. Chen hesitated, glancing at Morrison for confirmation. Park wasn't in their chain of command, and the communication systems contained sensitive information. But Morrison nodded, his instincts telling him that whatever was happening, Park might be their best hope of understanding it. The diagnostic display showed a complex pattern of signal strength, frequency modulation, and data throughput. To Morrison, it looked like organized chaos, numbers and graphs that conveyed information he wasn't trained to interpret. But Park studied the data with the focus of someone reading a familiar language. "There," she said after a moment, pointing to a specific frequency band. "Someone's running interference on the secondary uplink channels. It's subtle, designed to look like atmospheric disturbance rather than deliberate jamming." Chen leaned forward, her training taking over despite her confusion about Park's authority. "How can you tell the difference?" "Pattern analysis. Atmospheric interference is random, chaotic. This shows periodicity. It's being generated by electronic equipment, not natural phenomena." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's air conditioning. "You're saying someone is jamming our communications deliberately?" "I'm saying someone is testing your communications to find the optimal jamming frequency. They're mapping your vulnerabilities in real time." Park's voice remained calm, but Morrison could hear the underlying tension. "How long until the exercise begins?" About 36 hours, Morrison replied. But the announcement said the timeline was being moved up. Park nodded grimly. Because someone else moved their timeline up first. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. If Park was right, if hostile forces were actively probing their communication systems, then Exercise Pacific Thunder wasn't just a training simulation anymore. It was about to become something much more dangerous. "We need to report this immediately," he said. Reaching for the secure phone, Park's hand on his arm stopped him. "Report what?" "Suspicious patterns in BOD, the diagnostic data, theories about electronic interference." Her grip was gentle but firm. "Admiral Hawthorne just spent the last hour dismissing my concerns about system vulnerabilities. How do you think he'll react to what sounds like paranoid speculation?" Morrison realized she was right. Without concrete proof, his report would sound like the kind of vague security concern that got filed away and forgotten. Especially coming so soon after Park's public questioning of the Admiral's planning. "Then what do we do?" he asked. Park was quiet for a moment, studying the data streams flowing across the monitors. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made long ago. "We prepare for the system to fail exactly the way I described in the briefing. And we make sure we're ready to fix it when it does." She turned to Chen, her expression serious but encouraging. "Lieutenant, I'm going to give you some frequency allocations and backup protocols. They're not in the standard manual, but they'll keep communications open when the primary system goes down." Chen looked uncertain. "Ma'am, I'll need authorization from the communications officer to implement non-standard protocols." "Then get it," Park replied. "Tell him it's a precautionary measure based on observed system instabilities. Don't mention jamming or hostile interference, just technical concerns about reliability during high-traffic operations." Morrison watched this exchange with growing amazement. Park wasn't just identifying problems, she was calmly organizing solutions, distributing responsibility, and creating redundancy systems on the fly. It was the kind of crisis management he had seen from senior officers with decades of experience, not from a commander whose record showed nothing but administrative assignments. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "how do you know so much about fleet communications?" Park looked at him for a long moment, and Morrison caught another glimpse of something in her eyes, a depth of experience that seemed inconsistent with her apparent rank and position. "Mr. Morrison, have you ever been in a situation where everything you depended on failed at once? Where all your carefully laid plans collapsed and you had to find a way forward with nothing but improvisation and hope?" The question was rhetorical, but Morrison found himself nodding anyway. Every military officer had faced moments of crisis, times when doctrine and training had to give way to instinct and adaptation. "Then you understand," Park continued, "that real expertise comes from surviving those moments, from learning how systems break down and how to fix them under pressure." She paused, studying the diagnostic display again. "Some of us have had more opportunities to learn those lessons than others." As if summoned by her words, the ship's communication system crackled again with another announcement. This time, the voice belonged to Admiral Hawthorne himself, and the tension was unmistakable. "All senior officers report to Flag Bridge immediately. We have confirmed hostile activity in our exercise area. Exercise Pacific Thunder is now a live operational status. This is not a drill." Morrison felt his stomach drop. In the space of 30 minutes, their training exercise had become something else entirely. A real confrontation with real stakes. And the woman standing beside him, the commander with no ribbons and no apparent credentials, had somehow seen it coming. Park closed her folder and tucked it under her arm with the same calm efficiency she had shown all morning. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "I think it's time for me to stop observing." The flag bridge of the USS Nimitz buzzed with controlled chaos. Officers hunched over tactical displays while radio chatter filled the air with updates from patrol aircraft and screening vessels. The massive windows that normally offered a commanding view of the Pacific now revealed an ocean that looked deceptively peaceful, blue-gray waters stretching to the horizon, unmarked by the electronic warfare taking place in the frequencies invisible to human eyes. Admiral Hawthorne stood at the center of it all, his earlier confidence replaced by the focused tension of a commander facing an unexpected crisis. The exercise that was supposed to demonstrate American naval superiority had suddenly become a test of their ability to respond to real threats. "Status report," he called out as officers filed onto the bridge. Captain Reynolds, the Nimitz's commanding officer, stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "Sir, we have confirmed electronic interference with our primary communications network. The jamming is sophisticated, designed to degrade our coordination capabilities without triggering our automated threat detection systems. Source? Unknown at this time. The signal appears to be coming from multiple points, suggesting either a coordinated attack or mobile platforms designed to mask their origin." Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "How long before we can restore full communications?" "Working on it, sir. Communications Department estimates 30 to 45 minutes to implement workarounds." "We don't have 30 minutes," Hawthorne replied sharply. "If hostile forces are in our exercise area, they're not going to wait for us to sort out our technical difficulties." Lieutenant Commander Morrison entered the flag bridge, with Commander Park close behind. The sight of the unknown officer drew curious glances from the senior staff, but Hawthorne was too focused on the crisis to question her presence. "Morrison," Hawthorne called out. "What's the status on our backup communication protocols?" Morrison hesitated, glancing briefly at Park, before responding. "Sir, we're implementing enhanced frequency allocations based on observed system vulnerabilities. Commander Park has been assisting with the technical analysis." Hawthorne's attention snapped to Park for the first time since the crisis began. "Commander, I thought you were here to observe." "Circumstances change," Park replied calmly. "Admiral, may I suggest that your communications problems are more serious than they appear?" Before Hawthorne could respond, the tactical officer called out from his station. "Sir, we're losing contact with the escort vessels. USS Chancellorsville reports intermittent radar contact with unidentified surface contacts, bearing 270. The bridge fell silent for a moment as the implications sank in. Unidentified surface contacts in their exercise area, combined with sophisticated electronic jamming, could only mean one thing. They were facing a coordinated challenge to their operations. Park stepped toward the tactical display without waiting for permission. "May I?" she asked, indicating the keyboard. Captain Reynolds looked to Hawthorne, who nodded curtly. Park's fingers moved quickly across the interface, calling up frequency analysis data and overlaying it with the tactical picture. "Your jamming isn't random," she said, pointing to patterns on the screen. "It's targeted specifically at your coordination frequencies, the channels you use for fleet maneuvering and air traffic control. Someone has studied your communications architecture very carefully." "How do you know that?" Hawthorne demanded. Park's response was interrupted by another call from the communications station. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority message from Pac Fleet. Flash traffic, your eyes only." Hawthorne moved quickly to the secure terminal, his face growing darker as he read. When he finished, he turned back to the assembled officers with an expression that mixed anger and determination. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. Intelligence indicates that foreign naval forces have been monitoring our exercise preparations for the past 2 weeks. This communications interference is apparently designed to test our response to coordinated electronic warfare." A murmur ran through the bridge officers. What had begun as a training exercise was rapidly becoming a real test of their capabilities against an adversary who had clearly done their homework. "Sir," the tactical officer called out again, "Chancellorsville reports radar contact with what appears to be a submarine surfacing 15 miles southeast of our position." Park looked up sharply from the tactical display. "Admiral, permission to speak freely?" Hawthorne's patience was clearly wearing thin, but he nodded. "Make it quick. This isn't a test of your communications. It's preparation for something bigger." The jamming pattern is designed to isolate your command structure and force you to rely on visual signals and short-range radio. Someone wants to see how you coordinate fleet operations under electronic warfare conditions. "And why should I trust your assessment?" Hawthorne asked, his voice sharp with stress and frustration. Park met his gaze steadily. "Because I've seen this pattern before. 3 times. And, each time, the electronic warfare was followed by more aggressive probing of our defensive capabilities." The bridge went quiet except for the constant background chatter of radio traffic and the hum of electronic systems. Park's calm certainty stood in stark contrast to the growing tension around her. Captain Reynolds stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you've seen this before, what was the outcome?" Park turned back to the tactical display, her fingers calling up new data overlays. "The first time, we lost communications for 6 hours and had 2 near collisions between major surface vessels. The second time, we adapted faster, but still lost coordination of air operations for most of a day." She paused, studying the patterns on the screen. "The third time, we were ready." "Ready how?" Morrison asked. Park's hands moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, implementing changes to the communications architecture in real time. "By understanding that the jamming is just the opening move. The real test comes when they start probing your defensive perimeter with fast attack craft while your coordination is degraded." As if summoned by her words, the tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge chatter. "Admiral, multiple high-speed contacts, bearing 090, range 25 miles, and closing. Estimated speed 35 knots. Hawthorne's face went pale. Fast attack craft moving at that speed could only have one purpose: testing their ability to respond to coordinated threats while their communications were compromised. "Battle stations," he ordered, his voice carrying across the bridge with renewed authority. "Signal the escort vessels to close formation and prepare for possible hostile contact." "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we can't raise 3 of our escorts on primary frequencies. The jamming is getting worse." Park stepped away from the tactical display and moved to the communications station. "Lieutenant, patch me into the backup frequency array." The lieutenant looked uncertainly at Admiral Hawthorne, who hesitated only a moment before nodding. Park took the headset and began transmitting on frequencies that weren't part of the standard fleet communications protocol. "Sword base. This is Overwatch. Authentication Charlie 79er Delta. Request immediate implementation of Protocol Omega-7. The response came back almost immediately, clear and strong, despite the electronic interference that was degrading their other communications. "Overwatch, this is Sword Base. Authentication confirmed. Protocol Omega-7 is active. You have priority command authority." Every officer on the bridge turned to stare at Park, who calmly returned the headset to the communications officer. The exchange they had just witnessed was impossible according to everything they knew about naval communications protocols. No commander should have access to priority command frequencies, and Protocol Omega-7 wasn't in any manual they had ever seen. "Commander," Hawthorne said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, "would you mind explaining what just happened?" Park looked around the bridge, taking in the faces of officers who were beginning to realize that their assumptions about her might have been seriously flawed. "Admiral, your communications are about to be restored to full capability. The jamming will continue, but it won't affect your operational frequencies anymore." "How is that possible?" "Because the backup system isn't connected to the networks that are being jammed. It's a parallel architecture designed specifically for situations like this." If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Morrison found his voice first. "Ma'am, that kind of backup system would require authorization levels well above Commander." Park nodded calmly. "Yes, it would." The implications of that simple statement hung in the air as the bridge crew processed what they were hearing. But before anyone could ask follow-up questions, the tactical situation demanded their attention again. "Admiral," the tactical officer called out, the high-speed contacts have slowed and are maintaining distance. It appears they're observing our response rather than pressing an attack. Park moved back to the tactical display, her movements now carrying an authority that seemed to fill the bridge. They're measuring your reaction time and coordination under electronic warfare conditions. This is intelligence gathering, not an attack. And you know this how? Hawthorne asked, though his tone had shifted from skeptical to genuinely curious. Because, Park replied, her fingers working the tactical interface with obvious expertise, I helped design the exercises they're using to test you. The silence that followed Park's statement was broken only by the steady electronic chatter of the bridge systems and the distant sound of aircraft launching from the flight deck below. Every officer present was trying to process what she had just said, but the pieces didn't fit together in any way that made conventional sense. Admiral Hawthorne was the first to recover his voice. Commander, I think you need to explain exactly who you are and what your role is in this operation. Park continued working at the tactical display, her movements efficient and practiced as she coordinated the fleet's response to the electronic warfare. Admiral, with respect, my identity is less important than our current tactical situation. Those fast attack craft are collecting data on our response patterns, and they'll transmit that information to other units we haven't detected yet. Other units? Captain Reynolds moved closer to the display. What other units? Park highlighted several areas on the tactical map. Based on the coordination patterns and the sophistication of the electronic warfare, you're facing at least 3 separate elements. The surface contacts you've detected, the jamming platforms, which are probably submarine-based, and air assets that are staying below your radar horizon. Lieutenant Commander Morrison studied the display, his training allowing him to follow Park's tactical analysis, even as his mind struggled to understand how she possessed such detailed knowledge. Ma'am, if there are air assets, why haven't our combat air patrol detected them? Because they're not using active radar, and they're flying low enough to stay under your coverage umbrella. But they're there. Park adjusted the tactical overlay, showing probable aircraft positions based on electronic signatures. 3 aircraft, possibly 4, maintaining station about 40 miles out. The tactical officer looked up from his screen, his expression confirming Park's assessment. Admiral, I'm picking up intermittent electronic emissions consistent with airborne radar systems. Bearing and range match Commander Park's projections. Hawthorne stared at the tactical display, then at Park, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching awe. How could you possibly know that? Before Park could respond, the communications officer called out from his station. Admiral, I'm receiving a message on the priority command frequency. It's authenticated with codes I've never seen before. Park moved quickly to the communications station and took the offered headset. Overwatch. The voice that came through the speakers was calm and professional, with the crisp authority of senior military command. Overwatch, this is Lighthouse. Confirm your status and current operational authority. Park's response was immediate and precise. Lighthouse, Overwatch is embedded with Battle Group 7. Current situation involves coordinated electronic warfare and intelligence probing. Recommend escalation to Condition 2. Understood. Overwatch. You are authorized to assume tactical command as necessary. Will relay to all units in your operational area. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Morrison felt as though the deck had shifted beneath his feet. The woman he had shared coffee with that morning, the commander with no ribbons and no apparent credentials, had just been authorized to assume tactical command of an entire battle group. Admiral Hawthorne's voice was barely above a whisper. Commander, what is your actual rank? Park removed the headset and handed it back to the communications officer before turning to face the assembled officers. For the first time since Morrison had met her, she allowed something other than calm neutrality to show on her face. What he saw there was the quiet confidence of someone who had carried enormous responsibility and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. My cover rank is Commander, she said simply. My operational authority is somewhat higher. Captain Reynolds found his voice. How much higher? Park was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around her. Morrison could see her weighing options, considering how much to reveal and to whom. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. High enough, she said, to design the exercises that are currently being used to test your capabilities. High enough to authorize communications protocols that aren't in your standard manuals. And high enough to know that what's happening here today isn't a random probe, it's a carefully planned evaluation of our fleet coordination capabilities. Morrison felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. The classified reports she had mentioned, the communications protocols she knew by heart, the way she had predicted and prepared for exactly this type of electronic warfare, it all pointed to someone with access to the highest levels of naval intelligence and operations planning. Ma'am, he said carefully, are you telling us that you're not actually assigned to this ship? Park smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of amusement Morrison had seen from her. Mr. Morrison, I'm telling you that my assignment to this ship is considerably more complex than what appears in the duty roster. The tactical officer's voice cut through their conversation. Admiral, the surface contacts are changing course. They appear to be withdrawing. Park moved back to the tactical display, her assessment coming quickly. They've collected what they came for. Data on our response time, coordination procedures under electronic warfare conditions, and confirmation that our backup communication systems function as designed. As designed by whom? Hawthorne asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to suspect the answer. By the same people who anticipated this type of probe and developed countermeasures accordingly. Park's fingers moved across the tactical interface, calling up new displays that showed communication network architectures and electronic warfare defensive measures. Admiral, the backup systems that just kept your fleet coordinated during electronic attack, those weren't implemented yesterday. They've been in place for months, waiting for exactly this situation. Morrison stared at the complex diagrams appearing on the tactical display. The level of planning and foresight required to create such comprehensive backup systems would have required resources and authority far beyond anything a simple commander could access. Captain Reynolds stepped closer to the display, his expression grave. You're saying this whole situation was anticipated? That someone knew we would face this kind of electronic warfare? I'm saying, Park replied, that certain elements within naval intelligence have been tracking increased foreign interest in our fleet coordination capabilities for some time. Today's probe was not unexpected. And you're part of those certain elements? Hawthorne asked. Park's response was interrupted by the communications officer. Admiral, priority message from Pac Fleet Command. They're requesting immediate status update on current operations and asking for confirmation of special observer presence aboard Nimitz. Hawthorne and Park exchanged a long look. The Admiral's expression was unreadable, but Morrison could see him processing the implications of everything he had witnessed over the past hour. The woman standing before him was clearly not what she appeared to be, and the casual references to her authority and access were beginning to paint a picture that challenged every assumption he had made about military hierarchy and chain of command. Commander, Hawthorne said finally, I think it's time for you to tell us exactly who sent you here and what your real mission is. Park nodded slowly, her expression serious. Admiral, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that will require additional authorization for most of the officers in this room. Are you prepared to restrict access accordingly? Morrison felt his pulse quicken. Whatever was about to be revealed, it was clearly significant enough to require the kind of security precautions normally reserved for the most sensitive military operations. Hawthorne looked around the bridge, taking in the faces of his senior staff. Clear the bridge of all non-essential personnel. XO. Maintain minimum watch only. As junior officers filed out of the space, Morrison found himself wondering if he would be among those asked to leave. But Park's gaze found his, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Morrison stays, she said quietly. He's been tracking this situation from the beginning. He has the clearance. Morrison had no idea what clearance she was referring to, but he wasn't about to question his inclusion in whatever was about to be revealed. As the bridge emptied to essential personnel only, he realized that his quiet morning conversation with a mysterious commander had somehow led him to the center of something much larger and more significant than he had ever imagined. With the bridge cleared of all but essential personnel, an expectant silence settled over the space. The tactical displays continued their electronic chatter, showing the gradual withdrawal of the foreign vessels that had tested their communications and coordination. But the real focus of attention was on Commander Park, who stood calmly near the communications station as if deciding how much truth the moment could bear. Admiral Hawthorne positioned himself directly in front of her. His expression, a mixture of command, authority, and genuine curiosity. "Commander, I've been patient with the mystery, but my patience has limits. I need to know who you are and what authority you're operating under." Park reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small metallic device that looked like a standard military ID card reader. "Admiral, may I use your secure terminal?" Hawthorne gestured to the classified communications workstation. His eyebrows raised in surprise when Park inserted the device without hesitation. Most officers, even senior ones, required special authorization to access that level of secure communications. The terminal's screen flickered, then displayed a message that made Morrison's breath catch. "Authentication required, Omega clearance level." Park placed her hand on the biometric scanner, and after a moment that seemed to stretch forever, the screen changed again. "Access granted. Welcome, Admiral Chen." The words hung in the digital space like an accusation. Morrison felt his knees go weak as he processed what he was reading. "Admiral. Not Commander. Admiral." Captain Reynolds was the first to find his voice. That's not possible. "Commander Park, your uniform clearly shows a cover identity," Park Admiral Chen said quietly. "One that was necessary for operational security purposes." She turned to face the assembled officers, and Morrison saw something in her bearing shift. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding fleets rather than observing them. Admiral Hawthorne stared at the screen, then at her, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. "You're telling me that you're a flag officer? That we've been treating me exactly as you should have treated any unknown commander who appeared on your ship without explanation," Admiral Chen finished. "Admiral Hawthorne, you followed proper protocol. You questioned my authority when I challenged your planning, and you maintained appropriate skepticism about my credentials. Those are the correct responses from a commanding officer." Morrison felt dizzy as the events of the morning replayed in his memory. The woman he had offered coffee to, the officer who had calmly questioned fleet communications architecture, the person who had stood quietly at the back of the wardroom while Admiral Hawthorne delivered his briefing. She had been senior to everyone in the room, including Hawthorne himself. "Ma'am," Morrison managed to say, his voice unsteady. Why the cover identity? Why let us treat you like a junior officer?" Admiral Chen moved to the tactical display, calling up new information with the fluid expertise of someone intimately familiar with the systems. "Because, Mr. Morrison, the most effective way to evaluate an organization's true capabilities is to observe how it functions when it doesn't know it's being evaluated." New data appeared on the screen: comprehensive assessments of screen-ins, communication protocols, response times, coordination efficiency, and tactical decision-making. Morrison realized he was looking at a real-time evaluation of everything that had happened during the morning's crisis. "This entire exercise," Admiral Chen continued, "was designed to test not just our technical capabilities, but our leadership effectiveness under pressure. The electronic warfare, the foreign naval probe, even my presence here as an unknown observer, all of it was coordinated to create a realistic stress test of our fleet operations." Captain Reynolds stepped closer to the display, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "You're saying the foreign contacts, the jamming, All of it was part of a planned exercise? Not exactly. Admiral Chen replied. The foreign interest in our capabilities is quite real, and their electronic probing has been ongoing for weeks. But we've been tracking their activities and chose to use their intelligence gathering as an opportunity for our own evaluation. Admiral Hawthorne found his voice again, though it carried a note of uncertainty that Morrison had never heard before. Admiral, what is your actual position? What authority are you operating under? Admiral Chen called up another screen, this one showing organizational charts and command structures that Morrison had never seen before. I'm Deputy Commander, Pacific Fleet Special Operations. My primary responsibility is evaluating and improving our ability to coordinate multi-platform operations under electronic warfare conditions. The silence that followed was profound. Morrison understood now why Admiral Chen's communications had been answered so quickly, why backup protocols had appeared seemingly from nowhere, and why she had possessed such detailed knowledge of classified exercises and security vulnerabilities. Ma'am, Morrison said carefully, when you said you wrote the Coral Shield after-action report, I wrote it because I was the senior officer responsible for fleet coordination during that exercise. The communications breakdown that nearly caused collisions between our own vessels was a failure of my planning, and I made sure the lessons learned were documented and distributed throughout the fleet. Morrison saw the weight of command responsibility in her expression, the burden that came with making decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars in equipment. It was something he had glimpsed in other senior officers, but never observed so closely or understood so clearly. Admiral Hawthorne moved to stand beside the tactical display, his expression thoughtful. Admiral, your evaluation of our performance this morning, how did we do? Admiral Chen's response was immediate and detailed. Communication restoration was faster than previous exercises, largely due to Mr. Morrison's willingness to implement non-standard protocols based on technical recommendations from an unknown source. Tactical coordination during the electronic attack was effective, and your decision to move to battle stations when faced with unidentified contacts showed appropriate caution. She paused, calling up additional data. However, initial skepticism about communications vulnerabilities delayed implementation of protective measures, and the command structure's response to unexpected intelligence from outside normal channels revealed some inflexibility that could be problematic in actual combat situations. Morrison realized she was delivering a comprehensive performance evaluation based on observations that had begun the moment she stepped aboard. Every conversation, every interaction, every decision had been assessed and documented. Admiral, Captain Reynolds asked, what happens next? Do we continue with the original exercise plan? Admiral Chen shook her head. The exercise objectives have been met. We have current data on foreign intelligence gathering techniques, confirmed effectiveness of our backup communication systems, and documented real-world performance of fleet coordination under stress. She turned to face Admiral Hawthorne directly. Admiral, your battle group will receive updated tactical procedures based on today's observations within 72 hours. The lessons learned here will be incorporated into fleet-wide training protocols. Morrison felt a strange mixture of pride and embarrassment. Pride that their performance had apparently met standards. Embarrassment that they had unknowingly been under evaluation by someone whose authority exceeded anyone present. The communications officer looked up from his station. Admiral, incoming message from Pac Fleet. They're requesting confirmation that exercise objectives have been achieved. Admiral Chen moved to the communications station and took the headset. Pac Fleet. This is Overwatch. Exercise complete. All objectives achieved. Recommend immediate implementation of Communication Protocol Delta 7 fleet-wide. Full report will follow through classified channels. As she ended the communication, Morrison realized that the morning's crisis had been something much more significant than he had understood. They had participated in a real-world test that would influence naval operations throughout the Pacific Fleet. Admiral, Hawthorne said, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been present before. Permission to ask a personal question? Admiral Chen nodded. How long have you been evaluating fleet operations like this? Admiral Chen's smile was slight but genuine. Long enough to know that the best officers are the ones who question authority when they think it's wrong, maintain their standards under pressure, and adapt to unexpected situations without losing their focus on the mission. She looked around the bridge at the assembled officers, all of which you demonstrated this morning. Morrison felt something shift in his understanding of leadership and authority. The woman who had sat quietly through Admiral Hawthorne's briefing, accepting mockery and dismissal without protest, had possessed the authority to end his career with a single word. Instead, she had used the situation as a learning opportunity for everyone involved. "Ma'am," he said, "thank you for including me in this briefing, and for trusting me with the non-standard communication protocols." Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. "Mr. Morrison, you demonstrated something important this morning. When faced with technical evidence that contradicted established procedures, you chose to trust the data rather than the hierarchy. That kind of critical thinking is exactly what we need in our officer corps." As the immediate crisis passed and normal operations resumed, Morrison found himself looking at everything around him with new eyes. The routine procedures, the command relationships, the careful protocols that govern naval operations, all of it suddenly seemed both more complex and more flexible than he had previously understood. The secure terminal's screen still glowed with Admiral Chen's authentication codes as word began to spread through the ship's communication systems. Not the details, those remained classified, but something significant enough that senior petty officers and department heads started appearing in the corridors with expressions of barely contained curiosity. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood near the tactical display, his mind still processing the revelation that had transformed his understanding of everything that had happened since dawn. The woman he had offered coffee to, the commander he had tried to mentor through her first briefing aboard the Nimitz, was not only a flag officer but one whose authority encompassed the very exercises and protocols that governed their operations. Admiral Hawthorne remained at the communication station, speaking in low tones with Admiral Chen about the implications of the morning's events. Morrison could catch fragments of their conversation, references to fleet-wide implementation, and updated tactical doctrine. But the technical details mattered less than the fundamental shift in authority and doctrine, respect that had occurred on the bridge. Captain Reynolds approached Morrison with an expression that mixed amazement with professional embarrassment. "XO," he said quietly. "Did you have any indication? Any hint that she wasn't what she appeared to be?" Morrison shook his head slowly. "Nothing concrete. But there were moments. The way she analyzed the tactical data, her knowledge of classified communications protocols, the certainty in her voice when she predicted system failures." He paused, watching Admiral Chen work at the tactical display with fluid expertise. "I think part of me knew something didn't add up, but I never imagined it was because she outranked everyone in the room." "Including Admiral Hawthorne," Reynolds murmured. "Do you realize what this means? We've been watching a deputy fleet commander conduct a real-time evaluation of our capabilities, and we had no idea." Before Morrison could respond, the bridge's main communication system activated with an announcement from the ship's commanding officer. "All department heads and senior staff report to the flag bridge immediately. Priority Alpha." Within minutes, the bridge began filling with officers, representing every major division of the ship's operations. The Air Wing commander arrived first, followed by the heads of engineering, supply, and communications. Each carried the focused alertness that came with Priority Alpha announcements, the expectation that something significant was about to be revealed. Admiral Chen stood near the tactical display, no longer maintaining the careful neutrality that had characterized her presence throughout the morning. Her bearing had shifted subtly but unmistakably, carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding not just ships but entire battle groups. Admiral Hawthorne called the assembled officers to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to introduce someone who has been aboard the Nimitz for the past 18 hours, conducting an operational evaluation of our capabilities." Morrison watched the faces of the senior staff as they processed this information, confusion mixed with curiosity, as they tried to understand why a routine evaluation would require a priority Alpha assembly. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, Deputy Commander, Pacific Fleet Special Operations. Hawthorne continued. She has been observing our operations under the cover identity of Commander Park, and her evaluation has included our response to this morning's electronic warfare exercise. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison could see shock registering on every face as the implications sank in. The quiet woman who had sat in the back of the morning briefing, accepting dismissive comments and skeptical glances, had been senior to every officer present. Commander Jackson, the Air Wing commander, was the first to find his voice. "Admiral, I had no idea. When you attended our operations briefing yesterday, I treated you as you should have treated any unknown commander." Admiral Chen replied calmly. "Your adherence to protocol and appropriate skepticism about unfamiliar personnel were exactly correct." Morrison watched the reactions ripple through the assembled officers. Embarrassment, certainly, but also a growing understanding of what they had witnessed. This hadn't been a trick or a test designed to embarrass them. It had been a comprehensive evaluation conducted by someone with the expertise to understand what she was observing. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the ship's senior enlisted advisor, stepped forward with the expression of profound respect. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Admiral Chen nodded. "Granted, Master Chief." "Admiral, you spent time in the enlisted mess yesterday evening. You listened to the crew's concerns about communication reliability during exercises. Those concerns made it into this morning's evaluation, didn't they?" Morrison saw something in Admiral Chen's expression that he hadn't observed before, genuine appreciation for the enlisted perspective that often got overlooked in officer-focused evaluations. "Master Chief, the crew's observations about TAN's system reliability were invaluable. Some of the most important insights about operational effectiveness come from the people who actually operate the equipment." Williams stepped back and, without hesitation, brought himself to attention and rendered a crisp salute. "Admiral, it has been an honor serving under your observation." The gesture was immediate and instinctive, the recognition of authority combined with respect for someone who had demonstrated genuine interest in the crew's welfare. But it triggered something that Morrison had seen before in moments of profound recognition. Commander Jackson followed Williams' lead, his salute sharp and immediate. "Admiral, thank you for your evaluation of our air operations. Your insights will make us more effective." One by one, every officer on the bridge came to attention and rendered salutes that carried weight beyond mere protocol. Morrison joined them, feeling the significance of the moment settle around them like a change in atmospheric pressure. This wasn't just acknowledgement of rank, it was recognition of leadership demonstrated under conditions that revealed character. Admiral Chen returned each salute individually, her expression serious but not uncomfortable. Morrison could see that she understood the significance of what was happening. The transformation of a routine evaluation into a moment of genuine professional respect. "Thank you all," she said when the salutes were completed. "But I want to be clear about something. My evaluation of your performance this morning was overwhelmingly positive. You demonstrated adaptability, effective communication under stress, and the kind of critical thinking that makes our fleet effective." She moved to the tactical display, calling up data that showed the morning's timeline and decision points. Mr. Morrison's willingness to implement non-standard communication protocols prevented a complete breakdown of coordination during electronic attack. Commander Jackson's air operations continued effectively despite jamming that should have disrupted your procedures. Master Chief Williams' crew maintained equipment functionality under conditions that challenged every backup system. Morrison felt a warmth of professional pride that went beyond personal recognition. They had been tested by someone qualified to judge their performance, and they had measured up to standards that mattered. Admiral Hawthorne had remained quiet during the exchange of salutes, his expression unreadable as he processed not just the revelation of Admiral Chen's identity, but the implications of his own behavior throughout the morning. Morrison could see him replaying conversations, reassessing interactions, and confronting the reality that he had publicly dismissed and mocked someone whose authority exceeded his own. As the assembled officers began to disperse back to their duties, Hawthorne approached Admiral Chen with the careful bearing of someone who understood that an accounting was due. Morrison started to move away, thinking the conversation should be private, but Admiral Chen's slight gesture indicated he should remain. "Admiral," Hawthorne began, his voice carefully controlled. "I need to address my conduct during this morning's briefing. My comments about your rank and qualifications were inappropriate, and my dismissal of your technical concerns was unprofessional." Admiral Chen studied him for a moment, and Morrison could see her weighing not just Hawthorne's words but the sincerity behind them. "Admiral, tell me what you think your mistake was." The question caught Hawthorne off guard. He had clearly prepared an apology, but Admiral Chen's response suggested she wanted something deeper than mere acknowledgement of error. "I allowed my assumptions about your background to override my evaluation of your technical expertise," Hawthorne said slowly. "I dismissed valid concerns because they came from someone I perceived as junior and inexperienced." "And why was that a problem?" Admiral Chen asked, her tone neutral but probing. Hawthorne's jaw worked as he considered the question. Morrison could see him struggling not just with embarrassment, but with a fundamental reassessment of his leadership approach. "Because good ideas and valid technical concerns are independent of the rank of the person expressing them. My job as a commander is to evaluate information based on its merit, not its source." Admiral Chen nodded slowly. "Admiral, in 30 years of military service, I've learned that the most dangerous mistake a leader can make is believing that authority and expertise are the same thing. You have the authority to command this battle group, but that doesn't make you an expert in every system and procedure under your command." She moved to the tactical display, calling up communication architecture diagrams that showed the morning's vulnerabilities and solutions. "The technical concerns I raised this morning were valid regardless of whether they came from a commander or an admiral. Your initial skepticism was appropriate. You should question unfamiliar recommendations. But your dismissal of those concerns, once evidence supported them, was a leadership failure." Morrison watched Hawthorne absorb this assessment. There was no anger in Admiral Chen's voice, no condescension, just the kind of direct feedback that effective leaders provided when correction was needed. "Admiral," Hawthorne said, "how should I have handled the situation differently?" "By separating the evaluation of ideas from the evaluation of rank," Admiral Chen replied. "When I warned about communication vulnerabilities, you could have said, 'Commander, your concerns are noted. Communications Department, please verify the technical details and report back.' That would have addressed the substance while maintaining appropriate command authority." Morrison realized he was witnessing a masterclass in leadership evaluation and correction. Admiral Chen wasn't humiliating Hawthorne or undermining his authority. She was teaching him how to be more effective while preserving his position and dignity. "Instead," she continued, "you used my apparent lack of credentials to dismiss concerns that turned out to be accurate and important. That's not just unfair to subordinates who might have valuable insights, it's dangerous to your command and your mission." Hawthorne nodded slowly, his expression grave. "Admiral, I understand. And I want you to know that this won't happen again. I'll implement procedures to ensure that technical recommendations receive appropriate evaluation regardless of their source." Admiral Chen smiled slightly, the first expression of genuine warmth Morrison had seen from her all day. "Admiral, that's exactly the right response. Leadership isn't about being right all the time. It's about creating conditions where the right answers can emerge and be implemented effectively." She called up new displays showing fleet-wide communication, protocols, and evaluation procedures. "Your battle group's performance this morning will contribute to updated tactical doctrine throughout the Pacific Fleet. The lessons learned here, including the importance of evaluating recommendations based on merit rather than rank, will be incorporated into command training programs." Morrison felt a strange combination of pride and humility. Their morning's work was becoming part of the institutional knowledge that would influence naval operations for years to come. But more than that, they had participated in something that revealed the difference between authority and leadership, between commanding and leading. "Admiral Chen," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying genuine respect. "Thank you for conducting this evaluation in a way that taught rather than punished. I learned more about leadership this morning than I have in years of routine operations." Admiral Chen's response was immediate and sincere. "Admiral, the best commanders are the ones who remain willing to learn and adapt. Your response to this morning's revelations demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership flexibility that makes our fleet effective." She turned to Morrison, including him in the conversation. "Mr. Morrison, your willingness to implement unfamiliar procedures based on technical evidence, despite questions about authority and chain of command, represents the kind of critical thinking we need in our officer corps. You'll be receiving additional training opportunities that will prepare you for more senior positions." Morrison felt his chest tighten with a mixture of gratitude and anticipation. The morning that had begun with routine briefings and casual conversations was ending with career-changing recognition from one of the Navy's most senior operational commanders. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "thank you for the confidence and for showing us what effective leadership looks like under pressure." Admiral Chen nodded once, her expression serious. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating environments where the right answers can emerge and be implemented effectively. Both of you demonstrated that this morning, in different ways." As word of the morning's revelations spread through the ship, the USS Nimitz began to transform in subtle but unmistakable ways. The change wasn't dramatic, no sudden overhaul of procedures or radical shift in command style, but rather an evolution in how people approached their duties and interacted with authority. Morrison noticed it first in the communications center, where Lieutenant Chen and her team had begun implementing the backup protocols that Admiral Chen had introduced. Instead of simply following established procedures, they were actively analyzing communication patterns and proposing improvements based on real-world observations. "Sir," Chen said when Morrison stopped by to check on their progress, "we've been thinking about the Admiral's recommendations regarding frequency allocation during electronic warfare. What if we created a rotating protocol that shifts channels automatically when jamming is detected?" Morrison smiled, recognizing the shift in thinking that Admiral Chen's evaluation had encouraged. "Write it up as a formal recommendation. Include technical specifications and implementation requirements. Admiral Hawthorne will want to see any proposals for improving our defensive capabilities." The change in Admiral Hawthorne himself was perhaps the most significant transformation Morrison had observed. The man who had begun the day with theatrical briefings and sharp-edged humor had become more collaborative, more willing to listen to input from subordinates regardless of their rank or position. During the afternoon briefing on lessons learned from the morning's exercise, Hawthorne's approach was markedly different. Instead of delivering pronouncements from the podium, he facilitated discussions that drew insights from throughout the command structure. "Master Chief Williams," Hawthorne said, "your crew observed communication delays during the electronic warfare simulation. What recommendations do you have for improving equipment reliability?" Williams stepped forward with obvious confidence, his suggestions detailed and practical. Morrison could see that the crew's input was no longer being filtered through multiple layers of hierarchy. It was being sought directly and valued appropriately. Admiral Chen remained aboard for 2 more days, observing the implementation of new procedures and conducting follow-up interviews with key personnel. But her presence had shifted from covert evaluation to open collaboration, working with the ship's leadership to refine and improve their operational effectiveness. Morrison found himself assigned as her liaison during this period, coordinating schedules and facilitating meetings between Admiral Chen and various department heads. It was a responsibility that gave him unique insight into how senior leadership operated and planned for fleet-wide improvements. "Mr. Morrison," Admiral Chen said during one of their planning sessions, "you've observed the changes in command structure and decision-making over the past few days. What's your assessment of the sustainability of these improvements?" Morrison considered the question carefully. He had seen temporary changes in behavior before adjustments that lasted only as long as senior oversight was present. But what he was observing felt different, more fundamental. Admiral, I think the changes are sustainable because they're based on improved effectiveness rather than just compliance with orders. People are seeing better results from collaborative approaches and open communication channels. That's the kind of feedback that reinforces new behaviors. Admiral Chen nodded approvingly. That's exactly right. Sustainable change happens when people understand why new approaches work better, not just that they're required to use them. She called up displays showing communication efficiency data from before and after the implementation of new protocols. Your battle group's coordination speed has improved by 12%, and error rates in complex maneuvers have dropped by 18%. Those improvements will be noticed throughout the fleet. Morrison studied the data with growing appreciation for the comprehensive nature of Admiral Chen's evaluation. She hadn't just tested their crisis response, she had created conditions for measurable improvement in their daily operations. Ma'am, will other battle groups undergo similar evaluations? Modified versions, Admiral Chen replied. Each command structure has different strengths and weaknesses, so the evaluation approach needs to be tailored accordingly. But the basic principle assessing real-world performance under stress will be consistent. On Admiral Chen's final day aboard, a small ceremony took place in the same wardroom where everything had begun. There were no cameras, no formal speeches, just a gathering of the senior staff who had participated in what was already being referred to as the morning that changed everything. Admiral Hawthorne presented Admiral Chen with a plaque commemorating her evaluation visit, but the real significance was in his words. Admiral, your assessment of our capabilities has made us more effective as a fighting force. But more importantly, your demonstration of leadership under pressure has made us better officers. Admiral Chen's response was characteristic in its humility and focus on mission effectiveness. Admiral, the improvements I've observed over the past few days are the result of your willingness to adapt and your crew's dedication to excellence. My role was simply to provide a different perspective on capabilities you already possessed. Morrison felt the weight of the moment as he realized he was witnessing the conclusion of something that would influence his thinking about leadership and authority for the rest of his career. The quiet woman who had sat in the back of the wardroom, accepting dismissal and mockery without protest, had demonstrated a form of leadership that was more powerful than any display of rank or authority. As Admiral Chen prepared to transfer to her next assignment, Morrison approached her with a question that had been building throughout their interactions. Admiral, may I ask why you chose to conduct the evaluation the way you did? Why not reveal your authority from the beginning and observe how we performed under normal command conditions? Admiral Chen's smile was slight but genuine. Mr. Morrison, how people behave when they think they're not being evaluated by senior authority is often more revealing than their performance when they know they're being watched. Authentic leadership emerges under pressure, when people have to make decisions based on their values rather than their desire to impress superiors. She gestured toward the wardroom where the transformation had begun. Admiral Hawthorne's initial response to my technical concerns was problematic, but his willingness to listen to evidence and adapt his approach when the stakes became real demonstrated the kind of leadership flexibility that matters in actual combat situations. Morrison understood then that the entire WAIF evaluation had been designed to reveal character under pressure, not just technical competence, but the fundamental qualities that determined effectiveness when doctrine and preparation weren't sufficient. Admiral, he said, thank you for showing us what effective leadership looks like, and for trusting us with the opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities. Admiral Chen's final words carried the weight of experience and the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about leadership through years of carrying its burdens. Mr. Morrison, remember that authority is temporary, it comes with rank and position. But leadership is permanent, it comes from character and competence. Focus on developing the latter, and the former will take care of itself. As her helicopter lifted off from the Nimitz's flight deck, Morrison watched until it disappeared into the afternoon haze. The ship continued its operations, but something fundamental had changed in how they approached their duties and understood their responsibilities. The story of the morning when an unknown commander had quietly demonstrated the difference between rank and leadership became part of the ship's culture, passed down through crew rotations and shared with new arrivals. It became a reminder that real authority came not from positions or titles, but from competence demonstrated under pressure and leadership exercised with humility. Admiral Hawthorne's command style evolved to incorporate the lessons of that morning, creating an environment where good ideas could emerge from any level of the organization and be evaluated based on their merit, rather than their source. The communication protocols that Admiral Chen had introduced became standard throughout the Pacific Fleet, and the evaluation methods she had demonstrated were adopted for command assessments across all major naval operations. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on the officers who had witnessed the transformation: Morrison, Reynolds, and others who had seen firsthand how effective leadership could emerge from unexpected sources and create lasting change through quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures. Years later, when Morrison achieved flag rank himself, he would remember the morning when he offered coffee to a woman he thought was a junior officer, only to discover she was one of the Navy's most senior operational commanders. He would remember the humility she demonstrated in accepting dismissal without protest, the expertise she revealed when circumstances demanded it, and the grace with which she used her authority to teach rather than punish. Most importantly, he would remember that the most powerful form of leadership was often the quietest. The steady competence that solved problems without seeking recognition, the authority that emerged from character rather than rank, and the strength that transformed organizations through example rather than mandate. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?